There's a very specific kind of anger that belongs exclusively to people who own land out past the county line. It isn't a hot, explosive kind of anger. It's a slow, grinding resentment that builds up in the jaw and sits there, heavy and stubborn, whenever someone else tries to tell them what they can and can't do with the dirt they paid for. When you live out past the point where the county stops maintaining the asphalt, you expect a certain level of isolation. You expect the government to leave you alone, mostly because you know it costs them too much money in fuel and man-hours to drive a truck out and bother you. A man's property line is his perimeter. Out here, we take perimeters seriously. So when a guy named Arthur Miller woke up and found a white plastic monitoring pipe sticking up out of his front pasture, his first reaction wasn't fear. It was exactly that kind of territorial, slow, grinding anger. Miller lives on the extreme western edge of the valley. If you look at the master map my wife Lauren keeps locked in our fireproof cabinet, his property line sits right on the boundary of what we call Sector G. It's part of the buffer belt, the ring of territory between the deep exclusion zones and the county's maintained infrastructure. It isn't the deep woods, but it's close enough that the air always feels a little too still in the late afternoon. I got the call from Miller on a Tuesday morning. He didn't call me because he thought I was a stringer looking for anomalies. He called me because he remembered me from my days as a park ranger, and he figured I still had the phone numbers for the right bureaucrats at the Department of Natural Resources. Miller's voice through the phone speaker was tight, vibrating with the kind of stress that comes from feeling violated.
They're testing the groundwater, Evan. That's what they're doing. Sneaking onto my parcel in the middle of the night, driving a Schedule 40 PVC pipe right into my pasture, and they didn't even have the decency to send a letter. I know how this works. They sink a test well, claim the runoff is contaminated, and the next thing you know, I've got an EPA easement cutting my acreage in half.
I held the phone against my ear and looked out the kitchen window. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of winter day where the sky looks like an ironed lid. I could see the blue line I'd painted around my own perimeter trees, glowing faintly in the flat light. How do you know it's the county, Arthur? Did you see a truck? Did your dogs bark?
I didn't have to see a truck. Who else drives a perfectly clean, 4-inch white monitoring pipe 3 feet into the topsoil? I know what an easement looks like, and I know what a municipal test well looks like. But they aren't claiming eminent domain on my pasture. I'm not playing their game.
I frowned, leaning against the counter. What do you mean you aren't playing?
I took my tractor out there yesterday and pulled the damn thing right out of the ground, wrapped a logging chain around it, popped it out like a weed and left it by the ditch. Let them come ask for it back.
Miller paused, and I could hear his breathing change over the receiver. The anger was still there, but the edges of it were starting to fray into something else. Something he didn't want to admit to himself yet.
I woke up this morning, Evan. I went out to the porch with my coffee. The pipe I pulled is still sitting in the ditch where I dropped it. But there's a new one. Driven into the exact same hole, perfectly flush, perfectly white. And my dogs won't go within 50 yards of it. They're sitting under the porch whining like there's a thunderstorm coming.
My stomach tightened. The familiar cold weight dropped into my chest. The one that tells me the bureaucracy isn't the problem today. I told him to stay on his porch, not to touch the new pipe, not to start his tractor, and under no circumstances to call the sheriff. I grabbed my keys, my decibel meter, and my heavy jacket, and I told Lauren I was heading out to Sector G. The drive took 40 minutes. The closer I got to Miller's property, the more the landscape felt like it was holding its breath. If you pay attention, the woods will always tell you when you're crossing from normal territory into an active zone. It's never a visual change. It's a pressure change. The air inside the cab suddenly grew thick and heavy, like I was driving into a stagnant summer swamp instead of a freezing winter pasture. The radio static on the empty AM channels started to take on a rhythmic, pulsing quality. When I pulled onto his dirt driveway, the first thing I noticed was the silence. My truck tires crunching on the gravel sounded too loud, isolated, like I was driving through an anechoic chamber. The ambient acoustic dampening was already in effect. Miller was standing on his porch, holding a mug that wasn't steaming anymore. He looked exhausted. He pointed out toward the center of the pasture.
There it is.
The pipe was exactly where he said it was. It was a brilliant, sterile white, standing in stark contrast to the dead winter-brown grass of the field. From 50 yards away, it looked like a perfectly standard piece of municipal plumbing, 4 inches across, capped at the top with a heavy, threaded PVC lid. I didn't walk fast. I pulled my decibel meter from my pocket and kept my eyes on the analog needle as I stepped off the driveway and onto the grass. The ambient sound at the driveway was 42 decibels. Normal rural background noise. Wind in the dead grass, the distant hum of a highway miles away. At 20 yards from the pipe, the needle dropped to 35. At 10 yards, it fell to 28. The air was actively suppressing sound. The closer I got, the more the world felt like it was being packed in cotton. I could hear the fabric of my own coat rubbing against my sides, loud and unnatural. I stopped 3 feet from the pipe. I looked down, and my Ranger heuristics, the rules I built to survive things that wear the wrong shapes, kicked in immediately. It wasn't PVC. My eyes told me it was plastic. The bright white color, the smooth curvature, the heavy cap with its molded grips. It copied the exact look of our infrastructure. It was a flawless copy of the boring, invisible things the county buries in the dirt every day. But when I crouched down and looked closely at where the pipe met the dirt, the illusion fell apart. The dirt around the base was completely flush, seamlessly integrating with the white surface. The dead blades of grass weren't crushed or bent, they grew right up to the edge of the white cylinder, almost appearing to merge with it at the microscopic level. I leaned in, keeping my hands locked tightly on my thighs, actively resisting the urge to touch the anomaly to verify it. The smell hit me next. It wasn't the chemical scent of heated plastic, and it certainly wasn't the sharp, volatile odor of PVC primer and glue. It smelled like ozone, old pennies and wet copper. It was the scent of an electrical short, but heavy, organic, like blood left in a hot pan. Then I noticed the cap. If it was a solid piece of municipal plumbing, the seal should have been airtight, but the threads where the cap met the cylinder weren't solid plastic. They were porous. They looked like microscopic gills, venting the heavy, metallic smell directly into the freezing air. I pulled the infrared thermometer from my inside jacket pocket, activated the laser, and painted the surface of the pipe. I didn't need to touch it to read it. The digital readout snapped into focus. 98.6 degrees. Human body temperature. I moved the red laser dot up to the molded cap. 98.6. I moved it down to the base where it met the dirt. 98.6. The entire structure was running as hot as a living body, radiating heat through the white surface. I stood up slowly and walked backward, step by step, watching the white cylinder until the decibel meter climbed back above 35. Then I turned and walked back to the porch where Miller was waiting. He looked at me, his jaw tight, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his canvas coat.
Well, do I need to get the chain and the tractor out again, or are you going to call your friends at the state and tell them to come get their garbage?
I kept my voice as flat and level as I could. Arthur, I need you to listen to me very carefully. That isn't a pipe. It isn't plastic. And the state didn't put it there. Miller snapped, gesturing angrily toward the ditch.
What the hell are you talking about? I touched the first one. It felt like plastic. It sounded like plastic when it hit the bottom of the ditch. It's a damn pipe, Evan.
It learned what plastic feels like and sounds like. It's mimicking our infrastructure. We see a municipal pipe, we assume someone in a hard hat put it there, and we walk right past it. It's urban camouflage. But I just checked the temperature. It's running at 98.6 degrees. Arthur, it's alive. Miller stared at me. The anger in his face fractured, replaced by the kind of deep, primal confusion that precedes total panic. I've seen that look 100 times. I saw it on the faces of lost hikers when their compasses stopped working. I saw it in the mirror the night I realized my own emergency radio was trying to bait me out of my cabin. He took a half step back.
Alive? What do you mean alive? Evan, what the hell is under my property?
I don't know, but I'm gonna find out. Don't touch or let your dogs near it. If it starts to crack, or if the cap unscrews on its own, you get in your truck and drive to town. And don't look in the rearview mirror. I left Miller standing on his porch. I got in my truck and drove back to Lantern Bend faster than I usually allow myself to drive on those switchbacks. I needed the archive, and I needed Lauren. I track things in the mud. Lauren tracks them in the paperwork. Before we met, and before we had Emma, she worked down in the county records basement. So whenever I hit a dead end in the woods, I go to her to see what the bureaucracy is hiding. She was sitting at the heavy wooden dining table, surrounded by the physical archive. The fireproof cabinet was open behind her. Emma was in the living room building a tower out of wooden blocks, humming a song she learned at daycare, completely oblivious to what her dad actually does for a living, or why her mom keeps a cabinet full of redacted county surveys next to the kitchen. I poured a cup of coffee and told Lauren everything. The decibel drop, the thermal reading, the lack of soil displacement, the porous threads on the fake PVC cap, the ozone smell. She pulled a heavy spiral-bound ledger from the center of the table. It was the county tax assessment record from the previous 5 years, obtained through a series of quiet FOIA requests she had filed. She leaned forward, tracing her finger down a column of dense numerical data printed in tiny type.
Arthur Miller, parcel 882 West, 30 acres of pasture and mixed hardwood.
She flipped back 3 pages, cross-referencing the tax ledger with the parcel ops overlay map, the transparent, hand-drawn shadow grid the state uses to manage the deep woods anomalies without alerting the public.
Evan, look at this.
I set my mug down and leaned over her shoulder. She was pointing to Miller's property tax assessment from 4 years ago. It was standard for the acreage and the county rate. Then she dragged her finger to the assessment from 3 years ago. It had dropped by 20%. 2 years ago, it dropped by 50%. She tapped the paper with the end of her pen.
And this year, his property tax liability is 0. The county assessor zeroed out his parcel entirely. They classified it under a municipal easement exemption.
The pieces clicked together in my head, cold and sharp. They didn't claim eminent domain. If they claimed eminent domain, there would be a public record. There would be a hearing. Miller would have fought it in court. It would have made the local paper.
Exactly. They didn't take the land. They just quietly stopped charging him for it. They removed his financial liability so he wouldn't complain to the county clerk when the land started changing.
I looked at the parcel ops overlay map. Miller's parcel sat directly above a subterranean fault line that connected Exclusion Zone 4 to Exclusion Zone 7. Lauren traced the line between the 2 red zones.
It's a migration corridor, a deep bedrock fault. Whatever lives in Zone 4 isn't burrowing through the topsoil. It's moving through the cavern system to reach Zone 7.
Then why did it push a pipe to the surface? If it's moving through deep bedrock, the topsoil isn't heaving. Lauren slid a different folder across the table, tapping a column of dates.
Look at the county maintenance logs. Every time they map a new active zone, there's a localized spike in work orders. Ruptured water mains, sinkholes, but there are no county water lines out in Sector G.
I looked at the list of sinkholes. They perfectly tracked the red line of the migration corridor. My training finally clicked the biology into place. It's trapped in a closed rock tunnel. It's incredibly massive and sealed in bedrock. It needs oxygen.
So it pushes these mimics up through the topsoil?
To act as breathing tubes. It breathes as it travels. It chose a white PVC pipe because it knows we ignore them. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The coffee suddenly tasted like battery acid. Arthur pulled the first one out with his tractor yesterday. He choked it. Lauren looked up at me, tracing the line of sinkholes on the report.
If he pulled the pipe,
It pushed a second one up immediately because it was suffocating. If he pulls that second pipe, or if he tries to plug it. Those aren't sinkholes in the maintenance logs, Lauren.
they're breach points.
It won't just sit there and suffocate. It'll rupture the pasture to get air. Whatever is moving under his house will come through the surface. I didn't wait. I didn't pack a bag. I grabbed my keys, gave Emma a quick kiss on the top of her head, and sprinted to the truck. The drive back to Miller's property felt twice as long as the first trip. The gray, overcast sky had darkened into the heavy, bruised purple of late afternoon. The scanner clipped to my sun visor was spitting static. The interference was thick, rhythmic, thrumming through the truck's small speaker like a mechanical heartbeat. The corridor was active. Something incredibly massive was moving deep in the bedrock, and it was moving right now. When I skidded onto Miller's dirt driveway, throwing gravel into the ditch, my heart slammed against my ribs. The heavy diesel engine of his green John Deere tractor was already running. Miller was in the driver's seat. He had backed the heavy machine up to the white pipe in the center of the pasture. A thick, rusted logging chain was wrapped around the base of the white cylinder, the other end secured to the tractor's heavy steel drawbar. I threw my truck into park, leaving the engine running and the door open, and bolted across the pasture. My voice tore in the freezing air. "Arthur, turn it off!" He couldn't hear me over the roar of the diesel engine, or he chose not to. He shifted the tractor into a low gear, gripped the steering wheel, and eased his foot off the clutch. The heavy logging chain snapped taut. The white pipe didn't yield immediately. The tractor's massive lugged rear tires dug into the winter grass, churning up thick clots of frozen mud and tearing deep ruts into the pasture. The diesel engine bogged down under the load, blowing thick columns of black smoke from the exhaust stack. I reached the side of the tractor, jumped onto the metal step, and grabbed Miller by the shoulder of his canvas coat. I pulled him hard enough to unbalance him in the seat. "Stop the machine!" He stomped on the clutch and yanked the throttle back. The tractor settled into a loud, rattling idle, vibrating the metal step beneath my boots. He turned to me, his face red with fury, his eyes wild.
Get off my equipment, Evan. I told you. I'm not waiting for the state. I'm tearing this piece of garbage out of my ground, and then I'm gonna pour concrete down the hole and be done with it.
"You aren't going to move that pipe." I pointed past the rear tire at the logging chain. "Look at the chain, Arthur. Just look at it." He glared at me, chest heaving, then looked back over his shoulder at the drawbar. The heavy steel links of the logging chain were wrapped tightly around the base of the white cylinder. The tractor had put thousands of pounds of horizontal force on the structure, but the cylinder wasn't cracking. PVC shatters under that kind of localized compression. It splinters. It snaps. This pipe wasn't splintering. It was bruising. where the steel links bit deep into the white surface. The material was turning a deep, sickly shade of violet. As we watched, a thick, clear fluid that smelled like rusted iron and old blood began weeping from the compression points. The fluid hit the freezing steel of the chain and hissed, sending up tiny plumes of foul-smelling steam. The pipe was actively bleeding. Miller stared at it. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking hollow and old. His hands started to shake on the steering wheel, the heavy vibrations of the idling tractor masking the tremor in his arms. He spoke, his voice barely audible over the diesel clatter.
What is that?
I kept my voice absolutely steady. It's a breathing tube. I leaned closer to him, making sure he was looking at me and not the bleeding structure in his yard. There's something moving deep in the bedrock underneath your property, Arthur. Something so massive that it has to push breathing tubes to the surface just to survive the transit. The county knows about it. That's why they zeroed out your property taxes. They didn't want you to ask questions. They wanted you to sit quietly while they used your land as a roof for their migration corridor. Miller swallowed hard, his eyes drifting back to the weeping purple bruises on the white column.
Under my house? How do I kill it? How much dynamite do I need to drop down that hole to collapse it?
I grabbed him by the front of his coat, forcing his attention back to me. You don't kill it. You don't dig it up. And you absolutely don't plug that hole. I let the words hang in the air for a second before delivering the reality of his situation. If you choke off its air, it's going to breach to breathe. It won't come up through a 4-inch pipe. It'll come up through the foundation of your house. It'll blow this entire 30-acre pasture into a sinkhole, and it'll pull you, your dogs, and your tractor down into the corridor with whatever is traveling through it. I let go of his coat. Take the chain off, Arthur. Right now. He didn't argue. The fight was completely gone from him. He climbed down from the tractor. His legs were unsteady, but he walked to the back of the machine. He didn't touch the white cylinder. He used a heavy pair of leather work gloves to loosen the tension on the chain, letting the heavy steel links fall away from the base and drop heavily into the frozen mud. The moment the tension was released, the thing went back to playing dead. The violet bruises on the white surface began to slowly fade, the color leaching back into a sterile, pristine white. The clear fluid stopped weeping. The airway was healing itself, resetting its camouflage, pretending to be a piece of municipal plumbing once again. Miller backed away from it until he hit the rear tire of his tractor. He leaned against the rubber, looking out over his 30 acres.
I can't live here, Evan. I can't live on top of a cage.
You don't live on top of a cage. You live on top of a highway. As long as you let it breathe, the traffic will keep moving. It doesn't want you, Arthur. It just wants to pass through. I looked at the pipe. White, perfect, impossible. Leave the pipe alone. Paint it green if you have to. Build a wooden fence around it so you don't have to look at it when you drink your coffee. But let it breathe. I stayed on his property until the sun went down. I watched him drive the tractor back to the barn, lock his doors, and turn on his porch lights. I stood in the pasture, 50 yards from the white pipe, and held my decibel meter in the gathering dark. The ambient sound stayed low, hovering around 30 decibels. The air stayed thick and metallic. The scanner on my belt continued to spit rhythmic interference. But the ground didn't shake. The earth didn't open. The pipe did its job, quietly breathing for a monster moving through the dark beneath our feet. We live our entire lives surrounded by infrastructure we never question. Power lines, utility boxes, sewer caps, drainage pipes. We inherently trust the shape of bureaucracy. We see a white PVC pipe sticking out of the ground, and our brains immediately categorize it as safe and boring. The things in the woods figured that out. They realized they don't have to hide in the shadows or the deep fog anymore. They don't have to disguise themselves as trees or animals. They just have to look like something you were trained by society to completely ignore. If you made it to the end of this log, drop right away in the comments so I know you didn't touch the vent. And tell me if you woke up tomorrow and found a piece of county infrastructure sitting in your front yard that wasn't there the night before. Would you walk right past it like you were trained to do? Or would you go out there and put your bare hand on it to be sure? If you want more raw tapes, investigations, and field logs from Lantern Bend, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. The archive is getting bigger every day, and I'm not going to stop reading from it. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.